has been hit. Would you like to do a toast, Catherine?
Yes, we should. Yes, we should toast. Okay, so I'm gonna clink. So, do you want to talk about the drink?
Yes.
The happy hour drink.
Welcome to Virtual Happy Hour. I'm Sammy, the event coordinator at Square Books. With me is the lovely Katherine Center. First of all, we would love to tell you about our drinks, which are sponsored by the lovely people at Sola Oxford. It's called What You Wish For after Catherine's book, which is so exciting. The best news is that we have the recipe posted on our Instagram, and Sola makes drink kits that you can get curbside for or delivered by fetched, so you can make your own. It's very, very good. I'm a huge watermelon fan, so Catherine, what do you think about your drink?
I say it's off the charts good. Like, it's obscene. It should be illegal. That's how good it is. It's
It
so
really
good.
is. It's just too good. Y'all get on it. Okay. So we're here for Catherine's book, What You Wish For. Here's my very dog-eared copy because I read it a lot.
There we go.
Oh, she's got hers too. And those are available at Square Books with signed hard plates. And the first 50 people to buy from us get a journal that is special. Catherine, do you have the journal?
I do. My email just dinged at me, so I'm turning it off so it won't. Okay. So this pretty thing was made by my publisher, Macmillan. St. Martin's Press made this, and that's my handwriting right there. I made these little flowers, and they put together, and it was kind of a kind of thing. Like if you pre-ordered, you could get a free one of these. And so pre-ordering is obviously over because the book came out last week anymore. So the only way to get one of these now, because you can't buy them, is to order from Square Books. So if you want one of these cute things, and I'll show you what they look like inside. So they had me, it's a guided journal for helping sort of reconnect with love in reading and in books. Because sometimes school and life and academics can distract them, having that like a strong inner compass about what we actually like to read. So it's got little prompts in it that you can write about, like things like what were books that you used to like to read under the covers with a flashlight as a kid, like what were your flashlight worthy books and what did you love about them? And so it's prompts like that to help you sort of think about those things. And then they let me illustrate it. Oh God, I'm bad at cameras. Get to paint a whole bunch of flowers and find a whole bunch of like cool quotes about reading. Play, here's play, the work of childhood. And so it's this fun little thing. Anyway, so if you order a book from them tonight, like even if you already have a book, but let's say there are holidays coming up eventually and somebody you love is going to need something cool, you can order a book from them and then you can like steal their journal before they even know it existed. So it's win-win.
It really is.
Yeah, that's what there is to say about that. Can I also really quickly just also mention that this is a book that I wrote also, and it came out on the same day as What You Wish For came out in hardcover. So last week was kind of a big week, and I mostly talked about What You Wish For, but if you need a paperback of this, they're out there in the world, and I'm sure Square Books can hook.
I believe we have them, yes. Mary Ellen asked, where's the recipe for tonight's drink? It is on our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We're at Square Books. We're very easy to find. If you can't find it, shoot me an email at sammy@squarebooks.com and I'll hit you back. We'll get you the link because it's too good to miss.
You're going to want this.
Yeah. I have also dropped a link to order the book from us directly in the chat and a link to order from Sola if you need that curbside, which we all do. So let's get started. I had a list of questions, but then you talked about flashlight books, and that is one of my favorite questions ever. What are your flashlight books?
Oh my God. Well, I mean, as a kid, it was Garfield, right? And it was comic books. Like as a kid, it was comic books. And but as a grown-up, it's really, I would say for me, it's romance novels. It's bodice-ripping romance novels are definitely flashlight worthy for me. I mean, I'll stay up all night with a romance novel if it's good. I mean, I really will. And, I guess technically they're, like naughty pleasures or like candy kind of books. But for me, I actually, I can go all night on this topic of how I think romance novels are actually really, really good for you and really, really nourishing for you, especially in the world is falling apart and everything seems really bleak. Reading romance novels, I think it gives you this kind of, like, if it's done well, it gives you this simulated feeling of falling in love. And the cool thing about that is that when you get that feeling, the reason you're getting that feeling is because your brain is creating this cascade of chemicals that you would actually get if you were actually falling in love. And so when you read a romance novel, your brain basically like secretes oxytocin and serotonin.
Are we frozen?
Are we frozen? Am I frozen?
You're unfrozen now. Everybody good? Oh. Flash me a thumbs up. Excellent.
We're good.
Thank you, friends.
I'm sorry, y'all. I am in the mountains at this moment, kind of by accident. And the Wi-Fi is a little sketchy, so just bear with us if it cuts out, but hopefully we'll be good. So I was saying, I think when you read romance novels, it makes you feel happy. It releases all these happy chemicals in your brain. And even though you know intellectually that it's not you in the love story, like, it's other people, you get it, but you're so sort of immersed in what's going on between these two people that it feels like it's happening to you. And so even when you're not reading, you feel happy. You like go to the grocery store and you're just like, in the olden days when people, you're just shopping. Yeah. But you just feel happy. You feel happy because you're awash in all these good, happy chemicals. So I really think we all should be reading romance novels. And I really think they're very nourishing and very mood elevating. And I also think that the husbands of the world should be reading romance novels. They, could learn a lot of good things from them. So anyway, cheers to romance novels. That's
cheers
my
to romance novels. This is my favorite genre. So speaking of romance novels, Catherine and I were talking about them a lot before the meeting. Your book uses a trope that I love. It's maybe my favorite trope. It's the hate to love trope.
Oh yeah.
So Samantha and Declan used to be, kind of old friends, but at the beginning of the book are very much at odds. Tell me about your use of this trope and why you decided to use it.
I think one of the most fun things that you can get in a story is this arc of transformation, where people kind of start one way and then the things that happen in the story push at them and force them to change. And I think that there are a lot of different ways to work that arc out. All stories are really about change on some very basic level, but one of the most delicious ways is hate to love trope. And I love tropes. I love playing with it in them. I do not, like, I had, unfortunately, for a while when I was younger, I had a lot of literary training that sort of encouraged me to learn that stuff. And I've had to kind of come back towards it as an adult. Oh God, I'm getting a message that my internet connection is unstable.
No.
I'm just going to ignore that because, stability is overrated. So, so, it's just, I think watching that transformation is really fun. You start out with just clashing and frustration. And then what happens is, as the story continues to throw people together, like specifically in this story, it's Sam and Duncan, they keep getting pushed together in these weird ways where they have to kind of fight each other. But in the process of fighting, what they learn to also do is see each other's perspective and see each other's side on things. And they keep getting thrown together. So they're forced to kind of try to puzzle out what's going on with the other person, which kind of leads them to empathy and human connection. So I think one of the reasons that trope is so great is because when it starts out hate, you're like as far away from a person as you can be. And then as it moves towards love, it comes in this super connected, beautiful way. I like all stories where people, I also really love like a frenemies kind of storyline where people start out hating each other and then slowly become allies. Like, I just like to see people kind of come together and learn how to get along and learn how to understand each other better. So that's a really yummy trope. I'm with you. It's a good one.
It's one of my favorites. So we're talking about, like, a lot of your book is about human connection, and I wanted to ask about the importance of found family, which is such a huge theme in this book. Where did you get your
Yes.
inspiration for that?
I don't know that that was really a conscious thing. I think that just kind of came about kind of accidentally. You know, I knew from the beginning that it was going to be, oh, and here's, if you guys maybe haven't read it, the elevator pitch on this story is that it's about a school librarian. It's the worst new boss in the world. And he happens to be a guy she used to have a crush on. And when Sam finds out that Duncan is coming and he's going to be her new boss, she thinks it'll be terrible for her because she used to just have this sort of heart-rending crush, unrequited crush on him. She thinks it'll be bad for her in that way, but she thinks it'll be really good for the school because he was this sort of brilliant, warm-hearted, goofy, fun, inspiring teacher when she knew him, you know, years before. But it turns out it's bad for the school because he has changed so much in the time since she knew him, gone from being this sort of warm, goofy, friendly, enthusiastic guy to being basically like kind of like a prison warden, you know, and he messed with safety and he wears like a 3-piece suit and he wants to paint everything gray. And he's just kind of all about like control and safety and rules. And that's just totally different from the person she knew before. And so the questions in the story is, what happened? Like, what happened to Duncan? Why did he change so much? And she has to kind of puzzle that out because it's important for her to figure that out because she wants to protect her school from all these changes that he wants to make to kind of turn it into basically a prison. So I forgot the question, but yeah. What was the question?
That's okay. We need the elevator pitch. That's always good.
Yeah. But I was headed somewhere with explaining all of that.
Found families.
So the setup that I knew I was going to have from the beginning was that Duncan and Sam was going to be her new boss, and Sam was going to be resisting all of these changes that he wanted to come in and make. And what followed from that was creating the former boss, you know, the boss who was there before, the principal of the school before Duncan came. And that guy was a guy named Max, and he sort of dies suddenly and they're scrambling to find a replacement, which is how Duncan winds up coming. But so the whole found family thing, I think, sort of dominoed out from once I figured out, I knew that I wanted Max to be a really great guy. And I knew that losing Max was going to be like a true source of grief for the people running the school. And so as I kind of created Max, then his wife Babette sort of came from that. And then suddenly she had this great sort of found family of people who she worked with, but who she loved like family. She actually lives in their carriage because the story is set in Galveston, Texas. And Galveston has lots of carriage houses, which are cool and beautiful. So I was like, she's going to live in a carriage house. So she lives there, and so they're almost like parents. They live in the house, you know, connected to the carriage house. And so she's closer to Max, who dies, than she would be to anybody else. And yeah, she's kind of built a life for herself in Galveston. You know, she moved there kind of by accident just because she got a job there. But then she gets there and she finds all these great people, and she's got Max and Babette, and then she's also got this really good friend named Alice, who's a math teacher who wears all kinds of goofy t-shirts with math on them. And so she's kind of just created this really nice life for herself. And then when Duncan arrives, what he's trying to do is dismantle that life. I mean, not on purpose, not to her, but just he thinks everything needs to be different. And so she winds up having to stand up for the school, stand up for herself, and stand up for, you know, for joy, really. Ultimately, that's what she has to stand up for.
So my next question to you, this book is about, I think, the parallels between grief and joy. You know, that there are ups and downs in each, and that both of them, like, as emotions, are a journey. Do you want to go into why you chose to explore that in this book?
Yeah, that's a great question. A couple of years ago, I read a book called Joyful by Ingrid Fettel Lee, and it's a nonfiction book. And the subtitle for joyful is it's something like the power of ordinary things to create extraordinary happiness. And she's basically looking at kind of joy and how the joy that we experience in our lives is impacted by the world around us. You know, the things we see, the breezes that we feel, you know, the nature that we live in. And she's kind of looking at almost like neurological impact of our surroundings on our bodies and how those surroundings can create joy. And when I read this book, I just like almost fell over. I loved it so much. I devoured it. I felt like I learned so much about how that stuff works. And I felt like it kind of, for me, it really sort of opened up, pulled back the curtains for my own life and why I like a lot of the things that I like and why I do a lot of the things that I do. And I think it's because I'm constantly to kind of lift my own mood and fill up my life with little twinkles of joy everywhere. And so I loved this book. And after I read it, I was a total evangelist for this book. Like I could not stop talking about it. Like you could not run into me in the carpool line without me like insisting that you read this book. And even like well after I had finished, at least a year after I'd finished reading it, still thinking about it. And I started, when it was time to come up with like a new story, I started trying to think about, is there some way that I could write about joy? You know, is there some way that I could write a story where we could kind of explore a little bit what joy is and how it works and why it matters? And that's how I came up with the idea of writing a story set at a school. And I like the idea of having sort of a person who's very pro joy, which is Samantha in the story. And I liked the idea of having a person who is very kind of anti-joy, and that's Duncan. Like Duncan is so much about safety and so much about control that, I mean, it's not that he's actively anti-joy, but he just, like, joy seems irrelevant to him, right? And so I love the idea of forcing them to clash and forcing them to kind of duke it out and forcing her to have to articulate why it matters and try to convince him, you know? So it was a way for me to kind of make an argument about why joy matters and how we work it into our lives better. And then of course, you know, grief is the opposite of that in a lot of ways, right? And grief and joy are kind of exist on opposite ends of the spectrum. And yet there are all of these little moments when they intersperse, you know? One thing I think a lot about with emotions is that we tend to think of emotions as these big monolithic things. Like you think that if you lose somebody you love and you're grieving, that all you will feel is grief, right? For years after that. It's really not at all how it works, right? It's more like a Seurat painting, right? Where it's just our whole lives are made up of these little dots of emotions. And grief is a series of dots, but so is joy. And you can change the ratios of those things, you know? And I'm kind of interested in how all of that works. So I liked writing about both of them at the same time and doing like a little compare contrast and seeing how the two things sort of played off of each other.
And you do a really great job. Like the emotions in this book feel so human and so genuine. And that's why, you know, you root for Sam and Duncan on perspective sides because they're both right in a way.
Yeah. I mean, Duncan is not, he's frustrating, but he's not evil.
No.
You know, I mean, in his way, from his perspective, it's really, he's trying to help, right? And I liked the idea of like, you know, there's that idea that like everybody has a, you know, the villain. He's kind of the villain in the story, but he doesn't think of himself.
Yeah. Okay.
And of course, he's villain to like love interest is what he is.
Sure. Which is one of my favorite tropes. I'm here for it.
So good. So good.
Okay, so to get into a bit of a more serious topic, so the main character in this book has epilepsy, and I thought it was really, really well represented. What kind of research did you do?
So I have a friend as a child with epilepsy, and I've watched that child grow up. And so I've had many, many conversations over the years with the mom of this girl who has had to struggle with how to help her child in lots of different ways. And actually, the daughter in this little family has she had epilepsy as a small child, and then kind of in later grade school, it went away for a while, and they thought it was gone, and then it came back in high school. unexpectedly. And so, you know, we talked a lot about that. You know, that's been something that I've kind of watched happen in real time. And so for me, you know, I'm always, whenever I'm thinking about what kind of story to write or what to write next, I'm always kind of looking for stories that are inspiring stories about people who have to face hard things and find a way to kind of push through the difficulty and find wisdom in the struggle. And that's something that I saw my friend doing in real time, you know, and especially, you know, like as a mom, you know, your mom heart just, you know, just feels like ground beef whenever you watch any other mom's big, hard, scary health issue for their kid. And so, yeah, it captured my heart to watch the struggle. And so it was something that I had been kind of thinking about. And I asked my friend if it would be okay if I wrote about it. And she was, you know, she's a big reader. She loves stories. And so she was absolutely. So she very generously let me interview her several times. And her daughter also agreed to talk to me and be interviewed. So I got a lot of information from them, just took lots and lots of notes, and then shared with them what I'd written to make sure that it felt authentic, because that's really important in stories.
I think you did a really good job, and I'm glad you interviewed both of them, because it does make a difference to have both perspectives on that. Okay,
Yes.
so I'm going to ask Katherine one more question, and then I want y'all to ask questions. So go ahead and start submitting them in the chat. I'll be watching. So not to spoil anything, but this book does deal with the aftermath of violence at school, which is hard to talk about and hard to read about, but I thought you did it really gracefully. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, you know, there's an element in the story, there's an arc in the story that has to do with a school shooting. It's not the main part of the story, but in there. And when I first told my husband that I was gonna try to write about this, he was like, wait, are you gonna write a rom-com about gun violence? And I was like, you know, when you put it that way, it doesn't sound very good. But of course, any love story that you ever write, or any, you know, rom-com or any comedy that you ever write, has to be grounded in real things, right? And has to be grounded in sorrow and struggle. Because part of the reason that loving each other matters in this world is because life's really hard, you know, hard world to live in, and we all have to do more than our fair share of suffering. And so to me, loving each other and being kind to each other and looking after each other is like a very noble thing to do. And so in any story that I write, I always try to make sure that it's basically half tragedy and half comedy. You know, I want it to be funny. I want it to make you laugh. I want lots and lots of pleasure involved in reading the story. I want you to get to the end and feel satisfied. You know, I don't want to scrimp on the fun and the pleasure and the laughs, but I also want everything happening on that side to be grounded in the hardship that's very authentic to real life, you know? And, you know, I really feel like we have a tendency in the literary world to think of comedy and tragedy as at two separate ends of the spectrum, right? That comedy is a thing over here and tragedy is a thing over here, and there's no relationship between the two. But my life experience is totally different from that. I feel like comedy and tragedy just live shoulder to shoulder. I feel like comedy exists because of tragedy. Like, that's why we have it, right? We all know how hard life is. We all know how much suffering we're going to do. You know, we all know exactly how this is all going to end. And so comedy is there for comfort, right? Comedy is there to cheer us up and distract us and help us feel better about all of the hardships that we all have to face. And so I want to make sure that the stories have both. And I'm always looking for that balance. And I'm always nervous that I'm going to get the balance wrong, because I would never, ever want a person to get to the end of one of my books depressed or hopeless or life has no meaning. I mean, there are plenty of literary books that will do that to you. You know, the literary world has no compunction about holding back on or despair. But I'm just trying to go the other way. You know, I am looking for hope. You know, I am trying to find reasons to believe that there is at least some chance that the human race is going to pull it together, right? And for me, I think a little bit that's part of being a mom. Like once I had kids, my tolerance for bleakness went way down, right? Because raising kids is an inherently hopeful thing to do. You have to believe that we have a shot, at least, right, of pulling it together. So anyway, I'm always trying to write stories that have that balance. I don't want the light. I want there to be too much silliness so that the story doesn't have any gravitas and doesn't feel rooted in authenticity. But I also don't want it to be so dark that you lose the will to live. Like that's a balance that I'm working on, you know? And I talked about it with my editor actually a few years ago when I was writing a book called How to Walk Away. And I was saying, you know, I don't want the story, I don't want the darkness to subsume the light. You know, I don't want it to just totally take over. And then my editor, my brilliant editor, Jen Enderlin, said, if you do it, the darkness will define the light, which I thought was totally brilliant. I've been thinking about it ever since. She doesn't even remember saying it. But yeah, I try to use the darkness to define the light, but ultimately I want the books to be about light, you know? And I've already forgotten the question. What was the question?
You covered it pretty well.
Covered it. Okay. Woo! Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to write stories that that feel like they really matter, but also are fun. And that's kind of a tricky get. It's so easy to depress people. You know, that is not hard to do. If you want to depress the hell out of everybody, all you have to do is write a really likable character and then kill that character, you know? Yeah. I mean, you know, but for me, I'm trying to go the other way. I'm trying to leave people feeling hopeful and inspired, you know, so that they can kind of get to the end of the story and feel like they've learned something valuable by walking that story with that main character. And whatever they've learned, they can take it and turn around and look at their own life with different eyes, more hopeful eyes. And I'm really doing that because I need that as a reader. Like I want that for myself. I'm always looking for that in stories. You know, I really don't want to read stories that are going to make me feel hopeless. It's hard enough to be hopeful. Being hopeless is so easy. The world is full of evidence that, you know, we're all doomed. That's there. You don't have to look for that. So I'm trying to find a different story about the human race that's a little bit more hopeful.
Well, I think that sums it up pretty nicely. We've got our first audience question. How long does it take you to write a book from seed idea to turning into galleys? Do you work on more than one book at a time?
No. The second part of that question is definitely no. I'm a one thing at a time person. My mother should be nodding right now because I can't do more than one thing at a time. Like I can't even like walk and chew gum at a time. So I do one thing and I get very obsessed. Like this is why it's really fun to be me, is that I fall in love with things, you know, just everything. I fall in love with songs. I fall in love with TV shows. I fall in love with books. I fall in love with, you know, scenery, food, all of it. And so I'll get an idea for a story and I fall in love with that idea. And the only thing I want to do is think about that story and talk about that story and do research for that story. And I just obsessively circle around it. You know, I think in circles. I just realized this about myself like last year. I think I always thought I was supposed to be thinking in straight lines, but I just don't. So I circle around stuff. You know, I get an idea for a story and I just come back to it and I kind of spin around and look at it from all these different angles, you know, and then I go do some other things and then I circle back around the idea. And this is actually, you know, if I'm thinking about something wonderful, like a story as people bantering with each other, it's a really great way to live your life. If you're worrying about a pandemic, as a random hypothetical, that can be a harder thing, you know, because I do sort of circle obsessively around things. So I try to like set the channel of my brain on good stuff instead of super depressing stuff. But, you know, I'm still half and half. Like left to right, I always start with death in any situation and then have to talk myself back from the ledge, right? And talk myself into feeling more hopeful. The earlier part of the question was, how long does it take to write a book, start to finish, idea to galleys? It's about a year, roughly. I mean, it just depends on the year. Some years have been harder to follow that trajectory than others, but broadly speaking, yeah, I kind of research for about 3 months, and then I write for about 6 months, and then I turn it into my editor and get feedback, and then I make adjustments, and then yeah, by the time we sort of turn it in and have galleys, it's been about a year, roughly.
All right, our next question. Was the school based on a real place, or was it all from your imagination? It became so real to me, and I wished I'd gone to a school just like it, pre-gray paint, of course.
The school was pretty much made up.
It was a pretty good school, though.
The building in my mind looks a lot like a lot of beautiful historic school buildings that I've seen and fallen in love with over the years. And I've spent a lot of time in Galveston, Texas, so the setting was very real to me. When you read Ingrid Patel Lee's book, Joyful, which I know you will all do, she talks a lot about schools, because there's been a lot of work in schools trying to figure out how color impacts kids and how they learn. And there are all kinds of organizations that will come in and take like a really sad, dilapidated old, and they'll come in and they'll just paint, easy graphic designs on the walls, and then there'll be studies done on these kids, and suddenly their grades are better, right? And so it's a very cool read, Joyful, and she talks a lot about schools and how color and design can impact kids' experience in school day to day. So a lot of what I was talking about at the fictional Kempner School is related to what I was reading about in Joyful. So that's kind of where that came from. Yes, it's a great school. And I wanted to make it, my husband is a teacher and has been 20 years, longer, maybe close to 25. He's a kind of legendary, epic school teacher. And he, the before Duncan, the old Duncan, who was super fun and delightful and hilarious and wore crazy pants and crazy, that's all my husband. Like, my husband is the before Duncan. Actually my 17-year-old daughter tried to read the book, and she was like, I'm having trouble. It's just like reading about my parents. Sorry. You didn't need to finish it. It's fine. But yeah, so I have spent the past 25 years sitting around the kitchen table with my husband talking about his job, right? And talking about teaching and talking about what makes a good teacher and what makes a bad teacher. There's obviously, we all know some teachers are amazing and life-changing. Some teachers, like, just any interest you might have had in the subject, and like, what's the difference between those two groups of people? So I've spent a lot of time thinking about what makes a good teacher and what makes a good learning environment. And so this book, I think, benefited from 20 years of those conversations. And Kempner School became my sort of version of what I think an ideal school kind of ought to be, or could be potentially. So it was important to me to make Kempner really great, so that when Duncan came in and wanted to change everything and paint everything gray and put bars on the windows, it would feel like that we would all, kind of want to rise up and protect this very special place, Yeah, I wanted it to be a visceral feeling of like, oh, no. Like, this thing is already so rare. Do not mess this up. I wanted us all to be on Sam's side and feel like something was really at stake. So I did make kind of like as awesome as possibly could, basically.
Okay, next question. My daughter says you remind her of Alice, or vice versa. Do your characters tend to be composites of people you've met, or do they show up fully formed on their own? Well, we know about Duncan because that's your husband. But anybody else?
So that was the first part of the question. It was about Alice, the math teacher. Mm-hmm. Her daughter says she reminds her of Alice, like as a person.
She says you remind her of Alice.
You, me, Catherine?
Yes, Catherine.
Oh, that's a great.
Do you think of yourself as more like Sam?
I definitely think of myself more like Sam, because I am deeply, deeply math challenged. So the idea of me as a math teacher is very practical. Primary characters, like the main character of any novel that I write, is usually like a good percentage of me. And that's partly because I'm sort of trying to channel whatever the story is that main character is trying to tell. So, you know, it's their story. It's not my story. The things that happen to those people are not necessarily things that have happened. I do borrow liberally from my own life. But I tell it, the words that I use to tell that story are the same words that I would use if it had actually happened to me in a way. So they're kind of getting filtered through me. I'm telling their story for them. And they wind up absorbing a lot of me and my sensibility and how I would sort of process it or try to understand it if it had happened to me. So in a way, especially the narrators, they're going to be a big chunk of me. The narrator who's been the least me ever, was Cassie in Things You Save in a Fire. She's a very tough firefighting lady. And she is just fierce. She can do one-arm pull-ups. You know, she's not afraid of anything. And I'm afraid of everything, you know, and I don't want to go outside the house. Honestly, if I can and think about imaginary people, I'm good. And I remember last year at Christmas, we gave my son like a pull-up bar, like the kind that you hang over the door frame. And he was excited to do pull-ups. And after we got it hung, I was like, oh, maybe I'll try and do a few pull-ups. And then I realized that I couldn't even get both feet to the ground. Like I can't do any pull-ups. So I was like, okay, I am definitely nothing like Cassie. But of course, Cassie wound up having pieces of me in her, you know? So I think for the main characters, it's always a lot of me. And then I also have pieces of those people that are very different from me. And that intersection is kind of what brings it to life. If it were just me, I think it would get old pretty fast. So it's me, it's a version of me being whatever it is that they are. And that's fun. I get to do a ton of research to figure out what they are. You know, with Cassie, it was very hard for me to imagine actively wanting to walk into a burning building. Why would anyone ever want to do that? You know, my husband is a volunteer firefighter. I've watched him run out the door, you know, at fire calls for 20 years. And every single time he walks out, I think, why would you do that? Why? Like, why would you want to do that? And, but thinking about Cassie forced me to look at that whole world from a different perspective. It forced me to think about, why would you want to do that? You know, what would it be about that job that would make you want to do that? Because if there's anything at all I need to do for the main characters that I'm writing, it's empathize with what they want, you know? And it was very hard for me to empathize with Cassie because I was like, why would you want to put on 100 pounds of bunker gear and go into a hot building? That doesn't make any sense. So, and then with secondary characters, smaller characters, more minor characters, I usually start with whatever the function is that I need that character to serve. So actually Duncan Carpenter, who's one of the two main characters in What You Wish For, he got started in a different book. He was in a book I wrote called Happiness for Beginners. It was 4 books ago. It came out in 2015, and he was the main character, Helen's super annoying 10 years younger little brother. And he was like 20 and she was 30. And he totally existed in that story to make her mad. Like the whole reason was there was that I wanted her to be in a bad mood in the first chapter. And so I gave her a very annoying little brother who was supposed to pet sit for her. But then when she got there with her dog before she was headed off on this hiking trip to give her precious dog brother, he was throwing like a Girls Gone Wild, like keg party. And so I wanted her to start out in a bad mood. So I made sure that she had a super annoying brother who could put her in a bad mood. And I didn't really think we would ever see him again. But then when she went on the trip, she actually wound up going with her little brother's best friend, sort of by accident. And the thing that they wound up talking about over and over and over as they hiked through these mountains was Duncan. He just became their main topic of conversation. And so the more I wrote the story and the longer the story went on, the more it became really about this brother healed. And the more I just totally fell in love with Duncan because he was such a lovable goofball and such a disaster. And so by the end of the story, he was one of my favorites. And really from the time that book came out until now, I kept hoping that I would find a way to someday give him his own book, because I really wanted to see him again and give him like a more complicated sort of three-dimensional story. So yeah, so I got to bring him back. But often they start out because they need to fill a role or serve a function. And then in the same way that you get to know people in real life, you know, just the more time you spend with them, the more they say things you're not expecting, or the more they do things that you weren't expecting, and the more you kind of piece together like who this person is, and the more they become their own selves.
Well, I think that's the perfect place for us to leave off, y'all. It's such a good answer.
Oh, thanks.
So first, I'd like to thank Andy and Erica of Sola. Again, you can order from them online and get a drink kit. We are fans. Also, thank you to Katherine and her publishers for letting her be here. You can order signed copies of the book from our store. The link is in your Zoom email. You can also get that journal. So go ahead and get your orders in to get that free journal. Our next virtual happy hour is on August 10th. It's with Roselle Lim. And the book is Vanessa Yu's Magical Paris Tea Shop. If you like baked goods in Paris, join me. It's going to be a good time. Katherine, anything to add?
No, one thing I will say is if you miss me when this is over, you can come and sign up for my little newsletter that I send out 4 times a year. It recommends good things. It's called 3 Good Things. And it's like great novel I found, a great nonfiction read, a great podcast, a great movie. So if you don't like it, you can unsubscribe and it won't hurt my feelings. It's very low pressure. But if you try it and you like it, I think of it as trying to be like joy for your inbox, like just fun things. So come and keep in touch with me there on my website. And yeah, it's been such a treat. Thank you guys for coming. I know that time has no meaning anymore, so it's really hard to come to things. So I'm very grateful that y'all like got it on the calendar and made your way here. It's awesome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. For the people asking in the comments, we do ship. So we're happy to ship those to you. You can order them online or by phone. If you are local, we can do curbside pickup or local delivery within 5 miles of the square. You're all wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Katherine. Have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thank you, guys.